This episode is brought to you by Top Notch Cattle Company, raising high-quality registered red and gray Brahman cattle. Contact Baxter Whitworth at 903-649-9155 or at bbwtopnotchcattle@gmail.com. Are you wondering a way that you can consistently keep your herd being profitable? Well, in this episode, Dr. DeClerk explains how crossbreeding can be the answer to that, as well as the answer to feeding more people on less land and being efficient as an industry. Welcome to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast,
bringing you the innovative new ways of the cattle industry.
We're your hosts, Baxter Whitworth and Paul Hayes. Together, we're going to be interviewing leaders within the cattle industry.
Here on this podcast, our focus is honoring God and innovating the cattle industry. Get ready to listen, learn, and laugh as we help innovate the cattle industry.
Let's get innovating.
EP Cattle Company. Owned by Eddie Wilson, EP Cattle Company is home of Sir Rao's Handshake. Rao's Handshake is a sound-structured, heavy-muscle bull that is really bold-ribbed, so it comes with no surprise that he is a Fort Worth and San Antonio Junior Show Division Champion and Rio Grande Valley Open Show Division Champion. He is a grandson of BRC Noble and JDH Shank Manso, and is also a great-grandson of Mr. H. Elijah Manso. You can contact Eddie Wilson or Nicole Wilson on Facebook at EP Cattle Company. So remember, if you're looking for some well-performing registered Brahman genetics, contact Eddie Wilson on Facebook.
Time for another episode of the Cattle Innovation Station podcast, where we keep you current on beef cattle industry events, help you innovate your herd to turn a profit, and help innovate the beef cattle industry so we can feed more people on less land. I'm your host, Baxter Whitworth. Our guest today is Dr. John DeClerck. He is the Executive Vice President of the American Simmental Association. That comes with running the International Genetic Solutions, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today, is the American Simmental Association and the International Genetic Solutions.
Yep.
Well, to start us off, I guess the first question and the most important when we're talking about the Simmental Association is why Simmental?
That's a great question, Baxter. Obviously, I'm a big believer in Simmental cattle, and I have been very fortunate in my life. I grew up in the Midwest, in Illinois. I taught at Iowa State for a while. I did my undergrad at A&M, Texas A&M, taught at Texas Tech, and as a nutritional consultant, I got to consult everywhere from far west Texas to New Mexico, where we'd run a cow per 120 acres, to central Texas, there'd be a cow per 4 acres. I grew up in Illinois, we'd run 1 cow per acre. I'd be around the swamps of southern Louisiana that I got to consult in there in the Southwest. And in every environment, I was able to witness Simmental influenced genetics thrive. And what I've always been so impressed with Simmental cattle is the tremendous progress that the breeders have made. I think that traditionally when Simmentals came over, they were known as, like a lot of continental breeds, a breed that had a lot of horsepower in terms of growth and performance and muscle. But really the unsung story of the Simmental cattle is just the versatility and the maternal traits that they have. I really believe a Sim Angus cow is the best commercial cow in the country. And when you look at the longevity and how prolific those Sim Angus cows are, they do a lot of things really right. So I think that it's a breed that when you look at from just their ability to grow and gain, and then they still have got kind of marbling that we're after. And I'm pretty proud of the way the breeders have modernized these cattle to make them the right size as mature cows, to where they fit the environment, they wean off a high percentage of their body weight, and they breed back every year. So I think it's a perfect complement and a breed that can work in a wide cross section of environments.
So that's great, and you talked about the benefits of Simmental, and you talked about the benefits of Sim Angus, which it's not something you see as much around where I live, but I've heard great things about it. Um, can you also tell us the benefits of raising Simbraw cattle and doing that cross as well?
Yeah, so I think Cimbras are a great cross of cattle. So, one of the best thing about because Cimbras is they're very heat tolerant, and so we lots of times in the Simmental Association will just use the shorthand Sim Genetics. And I like Cimbras. We also have kind of a program called Sim Angus HT or Sim Angus Heat Tolerant, which would be kind of like a Simmental times a Brangus or a Sim Angus times a Brahmin, but a three-way cross. I think anytime you put a little ear into some of those, you'll find cattle that kind of are the best of both worlds, right? We see Brahman cattle are tremendous in terms of their heat tolerance. They're thick-hided. They've got a lot of longevity. They can survive in some of these humid climates down here, and obviously they can handle a lot more sun and dissipate the heat quite a bit better than what their continental and British counterparts can. When you add some Simmental in there with the tremendous improvements that our breed has made in terms of carcass quality and marbling, you're able to improve the growth rates, the fertility of those on a cross like that, and still have some carcass genetics that the Packers are always after too. So anytime you take a Bos Indicus times a Bos Taurus, you create a tremendous amount of heterosis and hybrid vigor. And those Cimbras are cattle that are very well adapted to the environment and do a great job of in some of those harsh environments of weaning off a big calf and breeding back every year and still creating a market animal that I think can do very well and be sought after in the feed yards.
And that's something about that I think is great is just whenever we're able to do those crosses and have multiple varieties, and that's able where the commercial producer is able to use the genetics from the seed stock producer how they best see fit in their herd and do whichever cross best benefits them for their environment, whether it be in South Texas or South Dakota, and um, just whatever benefits them as well. Because ultimately, the goal of the commercial or the seed stock producer should be to create the best genetics for the commercial producer. And so I think that that's always a great goal.
Yeah, I think Baxter, you talk about it. That the only free meal that we have in the cattle business is crossbreeding. When you use heterosis, you increase the lifetime productivity of a cow by 23%. You're going to get a 23% return on investment with a half blood cow because of a crossbred cow is going to last a year longer on average in production. They breed a cycle earlier. When we do crossbreeding and create those F1s, we get about a 10% increase in weaning weight. So if you're weaning off 500-pound calves, you're weaning off a 550-pound calf. And when these calves are worth $4 a pound, that's $200 that you get to put in your pocket just by utilizing crossbreeding to generate that heterosis to get that free bump there. And you talked about every environment is different. What we want to do is take complementary breeds and mate them together. So I may live in South Texas where it's like I've got to have some heat tolerance with Brahman cattle. I got to have cattle that can survive in a wet climate and kind of in the marshes or in the mud. So I got to have some ear in them. But I want to complement that with a breed that's going to be a little earlier maturing, reach sexual puberty a little quicker from a reproduction standpoint. Maybe make them black hided so they're a little bit more marketable. Well, then I could go buy a Simmental or a Sim Angus bull or something like that and complementary mate them. You talked about South Dakota. It might be the opposite, but I can find two breeds that have opposing strengths and blend them together and create a great crossbred animal. And not only do they complement each other very well and create that synergy that we're after, but just because of they're not related, through the magic of crossbreeding, I get that heterosis bump where I get that 23% return on investment on replacement females, increased productivity, and then additional 10% of weaning weight. It's really a situation you can't miss on.
And that just goes back to the like you said, the only free meal we have is crossbreeding, and that's great. Like we mentioned in the last episode, you're not. We said you weren't an economist in that episode. This time we're saying you're not a geneticist, but you're pretty knowledgeable on a wide array of issues, and you are in charge of the International Genetic Solutions, or IGS. And I want to know what is because multiple breeds. If I believe it's 25 breeds that use
Yes,
the
sir.
IGS. So how do y'all manage within the different breeds, and what is the benefit of a breed association using IGS?
Yeah, so IGS kind of plays right along with our mission at the American Simmental Association. You know what I was always really drawn to about the American Simmental Association is when the association started in 1968, the founder said, "Hey, we're not out here to chase show ring fads or any sort of kind of trends like that. We want to breed cattle on objective traits, on performance, on genetic evaluations, on cattle that work in the real world. And we're going to measure our association based on the impact on the commercial industry." And with that kind of mindset, the Simmental Association started IGS. And so IGS is this collaboration of 25 different breed associations around the world, a lot of them here in North America, and then we've got quite a few partners in Australia and New Zealand. And we all kind of work together to pool our data into to one base. And so, traditionally, breed associations have kind of had this, I'll call it kind of a tribal instinct, right? That like, hey, we worked hard to get this data, and this is our data, and we don't want to share this data with another breed because that other breed's competing against us in the commercial market. But in the grand scheme of things, if we put the commercial beef industry first and we put the commercial producer first, I realize that we're really not any competitors. We're just crossbreeding partners. So these other breed associations, we can be allies with them, and by collaborating and putting our data together, we all get a lot more accurate. And so we've got 25 breed associations from around the world. It represents about 23.5 million head of cattle and about 750,000 genotypes. And by doing that, we make our data that much more accurate. So I look at, data is the thing that really separates the leaders from the laggers in today's industry. Baxter, when you, get online or if you like social media, TikTok or Instagram, they're not guessing what you're going to like, right? They've got all your data. They've got the data from users just like you, so they can try to forecast what you're going to like. Or if you're, somebody like gets on YouTube and you like start watching videos and you're like, man, I don't know how YouTube's so good at predicting what I like next. It's like, well, if you watch a lot of World War II videos, it's going to find other people that like World War II videos and what do they like to watch? And it kind of gives you a pretty predictive algorithm, right? Amazon isn't just, taking a shot in the dark of what you like. They've got all this data. So data is what separates the leaders from the laggers. And so if it's not good enough for a Fortune 500 CEO to make decisions based on intuition alone, it's also not good enough for us as cattle producers either. And so the great thing about IGS is since we all collaborate and work together from a data standpoint, we're able to have a lot bigger database. So with the Simmental Association, we basically double the records that we have by collaborating with IGS. Now, if I could sit down with Jeff Bezos at Amazon and say, okay, how much would you pay if I could double the data that you have? He'd probably pay a lot of money to do it, right? Because he knows it'd make him that much more accurate, right? So that's what's great about IGS is that by actually putting the beef industry first, putting the commercial producer first, and saying, let's work together, we actually end up doing what's right for all of our associations in the end. The other thing I like about IGS is since it's a multi-breed evaluation, is that every EPD is on the same playing field. So you can directly compare a Simmental bull to a Red Angus bull in terms of their EPDs. There's no adjustment factors. I could do that to Gelbvieh or Limousine or to Shorthorn. Any of the IGS breeds, the EPDs are consistent. So I don't have to do adjustments. Most cattle people are like my dad. My dad does a better job taking care of his cows than he does himself. And he's too busy making a living and providing for his family to, look up some meat animal research data and try to do these crossbreed EPD adjustments and do the math to compare an Angus to a Hereford to a Simmental. The great thing about all the IGS breeds are, since we put everybody at the same base, you can make a direct comparison off breeds, which sometimes can make some breeders a little worried because they're afraid that their cattle might not stack up as well against cattle in other breeds. but at the same time, it's what's right for the commercial producer. It allows the commercial producer to make the most informed decision. And if we do a good job of educating those commercial producers that each breed are complements, can complement each other and find the strengths of each breed to crossbreed them and strategically match them, that's what we need to do, right? We probably should not anticipate, that a limousine bull should have as much marbling as a red Angus bull, right? We expect limousine bulls to have muscle and shape and expression. We expect, red Angus cattle to probably have a little bit more marbling. That's a great cross if you cross those two cattle together. So we don't necessarily need to worry about how they rank against each other. As commercial producers, we just need to educate commercial producers about what works in your environment, what 2 breeds or 3 breeds can you use in a structured crossbreeding system to create the ultimate composite that's going to fit for what you're after.
That's right, and I love that of having that even playing field. And by the way, on the algorithm thing you talked about a second ago, if you're watching on YouTube, if you like this episode, that helps the algorithm know that you like this kind of stuff more also. Just a little tidbit of information. But also, I want to go back to what you just talked about of doubling data and how people that are running major corporations like Jeff Bezos would love more data, and they're always trying to collect data. And I think that's a really important thing to understand, because I think when different industries, no matter the industry, it could have learned from each other, I think it's benefited them throughout history. And one example of that is when Ford implemented the assembly line.
Yep.
He got that idea from the meat packing industry, and how they had already kind of had a assembly line. And so I think the beef industry, the cattle industry, the cow-calf industry particularly, can learn from other industries of creating budgets and collecting data. And when we can learn from other industries, I think that helps our industry be successful as well, because business is business, and our product changes. Ours is a pretty important product because it's food, and food's pretty important. But when we can learn from other industries, I think that helps us out as well.
Absolutely.
Well, I always enjoy learning about genetics and solutions in genetics, but I think we've kind of covered that topic, and so we're going to go ahead and move into the pro tip session, or what we call it a pro tip session. And so we want to ask you your pro tips for certain things. And our first pro tip is, what is your pro tip for identifying cattle that are not feed efficient?
So, that's a good question. I think, again, like we talked about earlier, there's probably a kind of a balance to strike there. So most of the time when we talk to cow-calf producers, they look at cattle they call efficient as the really big-bodied, deep cattle. And if we're actually going to calculate their feed to gain efficiency, lots of times those cattle aren't quite as efficient in terms of converting grass into flesh. But in the long run, they've got a big enough rumen that they can eat enough grass that they can put on some extra flesh. So, we need a kind of a balance of both. Lots of times the cattle that are a little bit more tubular, particularly in a feed yard setting, will be the most efficient at converting feed into gain. But lots of times they don't gain fast enough to still be profitable. Like they're just slow enough growing because they just can't physically eat enough. So when I'm looking at an animal, I'm not just trying to max out feed efficiency. If I do, I'm probably going to get an animal from the 1970s that's tall and leggy and got zero middle, and probably not going to grade very well. So like, as I'm looking, to me, it's trying to find a balance of both. I don't need an animal that's just extremely pus gutted with no muscle, because of obviously it's a lot more efficient to put on a pound of muscle than a pound of fat. It takes about 2.25 more times calories to put on a pound of fat than a pound of muscle. So I'm going to be looking for an animal that's got muscle, got a big enough rib cage and enough depth of body that they've got a big enough tank that they can consume enough feed, that they're going to be able to put on gain at a rapid enough pace, but not so deep and sappy bellied that they've got a large GI tract, a large visceral organ mass that's going to require more energy to get there. So it's all about striking the balance. And when we're trying to identify what the ideal body type looks like.
That's very interesting, and that's yet another point I haven't thought of muscle. I mean, obviously muscle's important, but I haven't thought about muscle being a correlation to feed efficiency, where muscle takes less feed to create than fat does, and that's really interesting. I haven't thought about that. Well, our next pro tip is, what is your pro tip for finding research that can positively impact your operation?
Boy, that's a great question. So lots of times, I mean, I'll read Cattle Facts every day. I read Drovers every day, National Beef Wire, Beef Magazine, Feedlot Magazine. I'm kind of a junkie, so I really enjoy reading that stuff. So popular press is probably something that is going to do a pretty good job of kind of telling the stuff that's going to impact most commercial producers. Because if there is a big research study that is going to be done in a university, traditionally the extension folks at that university will write an article about it that will be picked up in popular press. Now, naturally, for me as a scientist, I'll read the Journal of Animal Science. I read Translational Animal Science. With my job now at the Simmentals and IGS, I'm always paying attention to Beef Improvement Federation, and some different kind of venues that we look at. I like going to, as a nutritionist, Plains Nutrition Council in San Antonio every year. That's one of my favorite events to go to. So, same thing for NCBA or different industry events. We've got a great Fall Focus is our educational event for the Simmental Association. So traditionally, there's a lot of different places to see that, to find different educational material. But, the nice thing is, just from your fingertips at home, you can subscribe to a couple pretty good newsletters and get a lot of that good information and kind of pick and choose what you want to find that could have an impact on your bottom line.
Okay, well that's good, and I know some people would rather listen, which that's great. You can always listen to learn, and this is a great resource for that. But I'll at least I'm always interested in finding the best ways to do things, and reading is sometimes the way to do that. But I guess moving on to our third pro tip, what is your pro tip when it comes to preparing for the ups and downs in the cattle market? And as you kind of talked about in the last episode, those ups and downs are typically less of monthly or weekly thing and more of a every couple years thing. So what is your pro tip for that? And also those that might be kind of a freak deal, that it does happen for, like, the market dips for 3 days and that happens to be the 3 days that you sell your calves.
Yeah, I always think it's tough for those of us in the cow-calf business because we're basically marketing cattle maybe once or twice a year. We think about a large commercial feed yard. Okay, so if I'm a feed yard that's got 50,000 head of cattle, I'm selling cattle every single week. All right, so if something weird happens and the market tanks and drops 20 cents or whatever in a day, or 30 cents in a day, and I have to sell cattle at a loss, the cattle that I'm buying as feeder calves, to replace them, I'm probably also buying under the market, and I'm going to make it back. And so when you're selling cattle as a feed yard, you're in the market basically all year, all 52 weeks, you're buying and selling cattle. It's almost a little bit of a risk management within itself, because you can kind of take the highs and lows. If you're a cow-calf producer, or even somebody that's maybe background in calves and you might only be selling them once a year, and your day to go to town is right after some big bill passes in Congress, or somebody says something, or a war starts, or a global pandemic, you can really take in the shorts. So that's where I think risk management makes a lot of sense. And I know that this is something that a lot of people aren't comfortable with, whether it's doing a put or a call or livestock risk protection. But it's really a cheap insurance policy, particularly when you look at how much money is on the line here where some of these cattle are at, and particularly during COVID. I was still a consultant at that time, and there was several folks that did not have their cattle protected, that were backgrounding cattle or feeding out cattle, and a couple of those guys went bankrupt just because of that precipitous decline in the market. It can be really tough to change or really tough to cover. So I've encouraged everybody that if you can look into those tools, livestock risk protection. Yep, there's going to be some years that buying a put or a call, maybe you don't make as much money, but it's not about hitting home runs in this business. It's about getting on base. And if you can kind of guarantee or get a single or double every year, you're going to stay in the cattle market for a long time. And honestly, right now, where the market is kind of climbing, it's probably a little easier to make money. But once we get to 2029 and the market probably starts to head down just naturally as we get more cows and there's more calves and the supply goes up, you're going to have to be a pretty savvy manager in order to make sure that you can kind of ride that. So now's the time to learn how to do some of those tools, because it may really come in handy here in a few years.
That's absolutely true, and I think that like you said, getting on base consistently is better than hitting a home run every once in a while. And like I just talked about, where the cattle, running a cattle herd, that's a business, and we need to operate like a business. And so if you see the most successful small businesses grow incrementally, and don't just try and risk everything at one time. And so I think that's an important concept to grasp also. And our final pro tip for the pro tip session is, what is your pro tip for starting a Simmental or Simbrol or Sim Angus operation?
Well, I think no matter what kind of operation you're going to kind of start, to me, you got to get a game plan, right? Figure out what your environment is. Find cattle that match your environment. I know I'm back home in Illinois right now. I'm actually in my brother-in-law's basement right now. But where I grew up here, we can run a lot bigger cows in Illinois than what we can in most of the areas of Texas and Louisiana and New Mexico that I used to consult for. So you want to find cattle that fit your environment, and then find cattle that fit your market. You probably need to identify what is your customers, what are they looking for. You're going to sell commercial bulls, you're going to sell show heifers. So get a plan, and then imitation is the best form of flattery, right? So find ranchers or producers that got the kind of cattle that you like, study them, figure out what they're doing right, look at their genetics, talk to them. Most everybody in the cattle business are great to work with, and reach out to them and see if they can help you. If you want to do something Simmental, I'd certainly be glad to point you in the right direction of some people that you can chat with or help you out any way that I can. But to me, it's get a game plan, find cattle that fit your environment, identify what your customers are going to be, what they're looking for, and then go breed cattle that kind of fit those parameters. And I think you'll be successful.
Well, that sounds good, and I'm glad that you kind of covered starting any operation. And another part of that is, that also goes with the commercial producer as well, finding the seed stock operators that they can trust also. So we're going to start closing and wrapping up, and it's unfortunate that Paul wasn't able to join us tonight, but it is kind of cool I get to ask this question, because I never get to ask it. It's always Paul's question. But what is your advice to ranchers to help them innovate their herd and turn a profit?
Yeah, what I like about our cattle business is that it is a business that is rooted in tradition, and a lot of us do this because it's the legacy, right? It's what mom and dad did, it's what grandpa did, and there's this romantic view of kind of continuing this way of life that we're all after. But sometimes in the cattle business, the most expensive words you can say is, "We've always done it that way." And I know, Baxter, I talked to you about this at a local seminar that I'd put on for the Simbrol Summit. And if you look at the average cow size in the United States, they've gotten quite a bit bigger. Over the last 30 years, we probably added 200 to 300 pounds onto our cows. And lots of times I would go to ranches and producers would just bemoan to me that like, boy, I don't understand. My cows don't breed back as well, and I got to feed them more, and naturally, it's tough to see those gradual changes over time. If you're a good manager, you're out your cows all the time, so you maybe don't notice that subtle change. But on average, we've added about 7 pounds of mature cow weight a year, and so over time, our cows are a lot bigger. So I think that you always have got to be willing to innovate, to reevaluate, and not just do things the way we've always done. Now, some of that may be do with cow size. Maybe some of that is doing to find a different marketing tool. Maybe some of that is investing in technology like embryo transfer, or maybe it's AI or finding some better facilities. There's a lot of different things you can do in the cattle business. A lot of it takes work. A lot of it maybe takes a little research and homework, but the great thing about this industry that we're in is that there's plenty of opportunity, and I think if you search it out and you get a game plan, you can do it. So to me, planning is the most important thing.
Well, I like that, and I've always said innovation isn't necessarily buying into the newest thing, and it's also not staying with what you've always done. It's finding what's going to make you most profitable and be the best for your operation. And also, I will always stay on the soapbox unless some big study comes out. I will always stay on the soapbox, or I find something different, that moderate cattle are so much better and so much more profitable and efficient than large cattle. And so I always love when people bring that up. But moving on, what is a core value that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, you only get one opportunity from an integrity standpoint, right? And I was at Louisville this last week, and I'll tell you, a judge that I really admire, Brett Murphy, was on the mic, and the cattle at Louisville, the North American, always just presented incredibly. And he said that he's like, if we took as much pride in our personal integrity as we do in the way that we present these cattle and how flawless they look, and we get them all fit, he's like, there'd be nobody in the world that could touch us. And whether it's employees that we have, the American Simmental Association, some of my former students, you don't get a second opportunity to go back on your integrity. So no matter what you do, you always make high character decisions, and in the long run, it's going to work out. Maybe sometimes in the short term, you might take a little longer to get there. Sometimes just telling the truth actually is going to make it a little bit more challenging, but in the long run, it's not only the right thing to do, but it's going to get you to where you want to be more successful. You should be more worried about building your own personal brand, and establishing yourself as a person of character, than maybe anything else that you do.
That's great. And I always think that it's easier to build a wall, or it's easier to tear a wall down than it is to break it. And that's the same way with integrity and honesty, that people can not trust you anymore pretty fast, but it takes a while for them to trust you. And so that's always a great point that you bring up. Are you looking for high quality hay that is priced well? Then make sure to visit Threadgill Hay Company. They have fertilized horse jigs and Tifton 85. They carry square bales and round bales. Their square bales are $8 a bale, and their 4x6 round bales are $50 per roll. That's a nice price and good quality. They're located outside of Mount Enterprise, Texas, and they will gladly give you more details when you contact them. Speaking of contacting them, you can reach out by texting Sawyer Poole at 903-646-4741 or Ronald Threadgill at 903-235-2011. And our final question before we wrap it up is what's your favorite Bible verse that you like to keep in your mind daily?
Romans 12:21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. That's a good one. I think that like when you like lots of times that first stimulus hits you, right? You get mad. You're not thinking, you just react. And you don't want to sink to somebody else's level. We're told to love our enemies or love those that hate us because it gets us closer to seeing the world through Christ's eyes, right? The Lord loves everybody. And I think that when you take that perception to everything that you do, I see some of the political strife that we have in this country and the division that we have. I think if everybody kept in mind Romans 12:21, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. We'd be a whole lot better world. Now, I'm not saying that I'm perfect at that. There's been plenty of times I've had to stop and remind myself, but that's one I like to go back to.
No, nobody is perfect at that, but like you said, if we could all just try and keep that in mind, that would help everybody out, And of course, that would also probably, because the Bible also talks about how kindness can be like heaping coals on people's head, and so when we do that, or when we do that, that also kind of helps minimize people wronging us again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was a great verse to end us out with. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we close? Anything you wanted to mention or talk about?
No, I'll tell you what, Baxter. Thank you for having me on here. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you understand. I think the world of you. You're such an inquisitive young man, and this is a great service that you're providing to the industry to bring people on and to try to talk about topics that really affect cattle producers. So thank you for your time and appreciate you having me on.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And to our listeners, I think this will be our last episode for December, but we'll be back in January. And follow and like this episode like we said earlier. Until next time, keep innovating the cattle industry. Signing off. Thank you for listening to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast.
We hope you enjoyed the show.
We're your hosts, Baxter Whitworth
and Paul Hayes.
Remember our key verse, Proverbs 16:3.
Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans.
Thank you for listening.